Daniel adjusted his tie, glancing at the invitation in his hand. Exclusive dinner at Blackwood Manor, a place he had never heard of. Yet, the letter was addressed to him, handwritten in elegant ink. The drive was long, the road winding through a dense forest. When he arrived, the massive mansion loomed in eerie silence. A butler greeted him, expressionless. "Right this way, sir." Inside, the grand dining hall was dimly lit by flickering chandeliers. The table was set for 6 guests, yet Daniel was the only one there. His chair bore his name in gold lettering. As he sat, a chill crawled up his spine. The other seats had names, but the ink was faded, almost erased. The butler poured him a glass of deep red wine. "The master will arrive shortly." A faint whisper echoed from the dark hallway. Daniel turned his head sharply. No one was there. Then, the candle flames flickered violently. A shadow moved at the far end of the table. Something was wrong. The butler reappeared, placing a steaming dish before him. "You were the last to arrive, sir. Now we can begin." Daniel's stomach twisted. The other chairs, they weren't empty anymore. Pale, silent figures now occupied them, their hollow eyes locked onto him. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. The once empty chairs were now occupied by 5 guests, silent, motionless. Their faces were pale, stretched too tight over their skulls. Their eyes, hollow and sunken, stared directly at him. The butler smiled coldly. The feast must begin. Daniel's plate was filled with steaming meat, but something was wrong. The texture looked unnatural. The smell was metallic, too rich. His stomach churned. Across the table, a woman in a tattered gown lifted her fork with stiff, unnatural movements. Her fingers were bruised, almost lifeless. Daniel's pulse pounded. Who were these people? "Where is the host?" he asked, his voice unsteady. No answer. The guests only stared, not blinking, not breathing. A clock chimed from somewhere deep in the mansion, a slow, heavy toll. The butler stepped forward, his polite smile unwavering. "You are the final guest, Mr. Daniel. The master is already here." Daniel's blood turned to ice. A chill crawled over his skin. Slowly he turned his head to the empty seat at the head of the table. It was no longer empty. A shadowed figure sat there now, watching him. Its body flickered like candlelight, its face a shifting void. The air thickened. A deep, hollow voice whispered from the darkness. "Eat, or take their place." Daniel's hands shook. He finally understood. The guests weren't eating, because they had already been consumed. Daniel's hand hovered over the fork. "Eat, or take their place." The shadow at the head of the table twisted and flickered, its form warping like smoke caught in candlelight. The silent guests watched, their hollow eyes locked onto him. His throat tightened. His plate still steamed with rich, red meat. The metallic scent was overwhelming. A fork scraped against a plate. One of the pale guests had moved. The woman in the tattered gown lifted her utensil in slow, deliberate motions, yet she never ate. Instead, she held her fork toward Daniel, as if offering it to him. The butler smiled. "Your choice, sir." The mansion groaned, as though the walls themselves were breathing. A deep, unseen hunger filled the air. Daniel grabbed the fork. His hands trembled as he pierced the meat. His mind screamed not to do it, but his body moved on its own. He lifted it to his lips. The first bite burned, not from heat, but from something deeper. His veins felt like they were filling with ice. His vision blurred. The candlelight dimmed. The shadow at the head of the table laughed, a deep, guttural sound that echoed through his bones. Daniel blinked. The guests were no longer watching him, because he was now one of them. His skin felt tight, his breath slow, his limbs unnaturally still. The butler stepped forward, pulling out a new chair. An empty seat. A fresh invitation appeared at the table. The front door creaked open. A new guest had arrived, and the feast began again.